Thanks, Zach. Oh, Megan, are you here? Yay! I'm so happy.
Yeah, my inspection, I'm able to be here today.
I'm so excited. Yay! Fantastic. So while Juliana's getting organized, I think that why don't we just start with some introductions? I know that we've got some people that weren't able to attend in June that are new members. So I wanted to extend a warm welcome. And I'm Kimberly Fitzgerald. I'm the Historic Preservation Officer for the City of Salem, and the lead staff person fearlessly guiding this group for our update of the enforcement policy. So I'm really happy that you all are here. And I want to also just turn it over to staff too. If you could introduce yourselves. Zach, you already spoke, but if you want to introduce yourself, and then Suzanne and Megan.
Yeah, my name is Zachary Cardoso. I work for planning, and I am helping staff the committee and taking notes and running logistics and stuff.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Reynolds. I'm the Code Compliance Manager, and I'm here to help make sure we can actually enforce any decisions you guys come up with.
Thank you, Suzanne. I'm glad you could come.
Thanks.
And Megan?
She's in her car. She looks frozen.
Oh no. Well, Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan. I'm a co-compliance. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Yay.
Hopefully you can.
We can see you and hear you, or sort of.
Still hear me. It's telling me my bandwidth is low. I don't know what that means.
You might want to turn your face off.
I'm a co-compliance officer. Okay. Are we good now?
Yeah,
Yep.
that works.
Okay. I'm a co-compliance officer with the City of Salem, and I'm also one of the multifamily building inspectors. So I'm just here for input of how we could go about sort of enforcing certain things. We went over some of it last.
Yes, thank you. I'm so glad you're here. And
But hopefully we can have more input this time too. So
yeah, great. And Stephanie, while she's not able to come today, hopefully she'll be able to come next time. She's another staff person that will be helping on the back end of this. So Juliana, are you able to get your mic working? I think you're muted. We can't hear you. Wow.
Okay.
There you are. Yay. All right, well, I'm going to turn it over to you. I hope you have an agenda, and then if you can continue with introductions, and then we can just follow the agenda, and I can take over after you're done.
Okay. And I'll introduce myself. I'm Juliana Inman, and I'm a preservation architect in California, and resident of the Court Chemeketa National Register Historic District. So moving on to introductions, let's see. We haven't heard from, let's see, Claudia. Have we heard? Yes.
I'm Claudia Howells. I live in Scan, just off of Bush Park.
Excellent. And Joan Lloyd.
Hi, I still have a house on Court Street in the CCRHD, soon to be my son's, and so I'll be encouraging him to follow the code. But I'm in Nen. I'm in a rental house in Nen, so I'm still eligible to be on the committee.
Excellent. Okay. Mary Ann, did we hear from you?
Nope, not yet. Mary Ann Spradlin, live in Gaiety Hill Historic District, representing SCAN.
Excellent. All right. And Kendra. We need to unmute Kendra.
Hi, I'm Kendra Mingo. I am also a resident of the Gaiety Hill neighborhood and representative from SCAN.
Excellent. And Michael Livingston, and I'd like to hear from you. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Livingston. I'm the vice chair of the Can Do Neighborhood Association. And before I moved into an apartment in the Can Do area, I lived in a historic house in the Court Chemeketa area for about 15 years.
Excellent. Okay. Is that everyone, Kimberly? Is that everyone you see?
I think so. I always have fun like scrolling around. I think that is, yes. And there are a few folks that weren't able to join us today, but Zach is recording the meeting, and I think it'll be available on YouTube this time, which will make it easier for those who weren't able to attend to watch.
Okay. And I think we have another representative from Court Chemeketa,
Yes.
Jamie White, who will be joining us for subsequent meetings.
Great, fantastic. All right, well, thank you everyone and welcome. And Juliana, if you're comfortable, I'm going to jump on into the presentation unless there's anything else you want to discuss at this point.
I think at this point, we'd like to catch everybody up on what this committee is doing, what its purpose is, and what our initial survey results are. And if you would take that away. And
yes, so some of this will be a repeat of June, but because we have several new members, I did want to thoroughly go back to the beginning as to how we got here, why we're here, and the work that we're doing. So this is one of our new actions that was identified in the Landmarks Commission work plan. So the Historic Landmarks Commission directed staff to form an advisory committee to provide input for the staff update of our existing historic enforcement policy, which we originally adopted back in, 2013, I think. And so this committee will meet through the end of December and includes neighborhood representatives and staff. And the intention is that we're going to hear from you, and then staff will update our enforcement policy. And so where we're at here. So last time in June, Jennifer McGlinty-Timbrook, who isn't able to attend today, she agreed to be the chair, and Juliana is our vice chair. Thank you, Juliana. And we initially discussed our first survey and have developed a draft set of goals and priorities. You all were sent a second follow-up survey in August, thanks to those of you who were able to complete it. And moving forward in October, we're hoping we can finalize these recommended goals and priorities with specific strategies to implement them by October, and then finalize our work in December. And your agenda should have a list of the specific dates. We've set our meeting dates the last Tuesday of the month during the lunch hour. That seems to work the best for most people. And just for those of you who aren't familiar, these are our current adopted policies and strategies. I'm not going to read them all here, but the intent, overall intent, is to ensure that our designated resources are maintained. And the strategies right now, they're complaint driven primarily. We don't have a big capacity for staff to go out and actively monitor. And so that's why you're seeing the questions that you're seeing in the surveys. We're trying to figure out how to address that issue, because one of the problems that was identified in the public outreach for the plan is that our enforcement has been kind of inconsistent because it's complaint driven. So I'm going to go over very briefly the responses from the June survey and also from the August survey. I won't go into a whole lot of detail, but if you have questions, what I'll want to do is stop after I go through this. If there's anything you want to discuss a little bit more, we can go back and discuss. Okay, so this is our June survey. In answer to the question about why people do work without getting historic design review, the most common answer was a lack of understanding about our design review process. The development of a welcome packet and a flyer were the top answers when asked what tools could be used to best address this problem. Proactive outreach to at-risk property owners in coordination with the city's enforcement division were the top answers about what tools could be used to deal with our current enforcement policy. And now shifting gears to our August survey, majority of respondents felt that the proposed goals, which I haven't shared with you yet, they're at the end, are acceptable. One respondent felt we should add engaging real estate agents, in particular that people should be aware before buying a property that it is designated historic. The second question, the City of Salem website was the primary source for getting information about our historic preservation process, with the newsletter coming in second. For question 3, mail was the top answer for recommended distribution of a welcome packet and flyer. And this question, some neighborhood associations have a listserv to help share information, but not all. That seemed to be like, maybe it should be a supplementary tool we could use, but not a primary. A majority of respondents stated they would be willing to assist with the collection of photos to help us develop a baseline understanding of the status, but there was some uncertainty about its effectiveness. And while a majority of respondents stated they would be willing to assist with the ongoing annual monitoring using that same system, one respondent felt this would be primarily a city staff responsibility. So for this question, a majority of respondents felt that this policy is acceptable. The one about we have an existing policy where historic preservation staff takes 30 days to try and work with the property owner to get proactive compliance before turning it over to an enforcement staff. And one respondent specifically said that, again, this complaint-driven process is inconsistent. Okay, so this last one, the majority of respondents believe that eligibility for financial incentives shouldn't be hindered by enforcement. One respondent agreed that as long as the violation was unintentional, it's okay to continue to allow them to apply for our residential toolbox grant funds. But one respondent believed that that would not be okay, that they shouldn't have access to that. All right, so Juliana, did you want to talk through any of these responses now, or I can just jump into discussing the goals and the proposed goals and strategies?
Well, I would just ask if there are any questions about the survey or the responses at this point from any of the committee members.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment that I did respond to the survey, but not in time for this presentation. So you may have different data.
Oh, great. I appreciate your taking the time to do that. Yeah, this is a big picture. I did ask folks if you didn't have a chance to do it. So we'll update those responses and bring them back when we discuss, when we compile everything for October. But is there anything you wanted to add, Kendra, that you wanted to contribute at this point? Anything remarkably different or anything you want to share?
No, I do feel like some of the dissemination methods that you suggested, that there are a couple of additional things you might consider since you're talking about developing flyers and or kind of paper versions of information. And I feel like there might be some opportunity to record a presentation of that same information and post that on your website.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Just because you're already creating the material, so why not just get more bang for your buck?
Great.
And I guess the other two things I noted in taking the survey would be with the flyer, I would want to also, beyond explaining when HDR is required, I would also want there to be some information about consequences if you aren't compliant. And I felt that as someone else put it, the dissemination of strategies A and B, the mail and flyer to realtors associations in Salem would be a good dissemination tool. That's it.
Great. Thank you. All right, I'm, as you can probably see, updating the goals and strategies with this input as we speak. So does anyone else want to share any additional ideas at this point? If not, I'll just go over what I've got.
So, Kimberly?
Yeah.
I have a comment. I think Mary Ann does too. I think I was the one who mentioned communicating with local realtors. I assume that they get information on what zones are where in the city and are reasonably familiar with that. So I would think this would not be a big hardship. But after watching the very interesting video that you sent with the email, I also thought what Denver is doing in terms of communicating with contractors, and I also thought about architects, would be a very good thing and probably not that difficult to do because most of them have to come through the city for various permits, and so the information could be easily disseminated. It's not going to catch everybody. You know, we've got contractors who come from other cities. But to the extent that we get people before they actually buy properties, we're going to cut out a lot of the problems with the people who, move in and really have no idea what they're doing, particularly if they're new to Oregon or new to Salem. So though I would just add communicating with contractors and architects.
That's great. I added that to D. I did want to mention, I've put in parentheses here, the city lien process. So this is something we implemented at the council's direction in 2011. And so what happens is when a title company, they're required to check in with the city of Salem, the finance division, to see if there's any liens on the property at the time of purchase. And so what they get now is a letter from me that states the property you are considering buying is designated historic. Please contact me with any questions you might have. And they're required to sign that. So that's actually stopped a few sales because people are like, oh, I didn't know. But I will also say that it doesn't, I'm not sure what happens along the way, but like I just recently heard from someone who purchased a property. They did receive that, but for whatever reason, I never talked to them. So there was something broke down there and I'm not sure what it is. And it may be that they bought the property directly from the property owner and didn't use a title company. So I'm not sure what happened there. So there's some work to be done to figure that out. But yeah. Mary Ann, did you have a?
It was basically the same thing that Claudia said. I stuck it in the chat.
Oh, great.
So.
Oh, fantastic. Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to make this. So I'm just going to go through the goals and then I'm going to turn it back over to Julianne. If there's any other questions that you have, please feel free to just raise your hand. But right now, the goals around education are as you see them here. The different colors are just, these are changes from June that we've added. So regarding the education, I think that, you know, we discussed the welcome packet, development of a flyer, proactively outreaching to people, to at-risk property owners. And I say that word at risk, and I think this might be a question for Suzanne and your team is, and this is something that we struggled with. Do you have any insight ideas about how to identify what at risk is? I know that there's an email that we get regularly, and I'm sorry, I don't remember precisely what that email is about, but that word at risk is kind of squishy. Do you identify properties with your staff already? Is there an existing process where you're looking at properties that you're concerned about?
Yeah, we have a POI list. It's the properties of interest. And the properties of interest has derelict buildings, dangerous buildings, properties where we've removed their multifamily license due to excessive or dangerous violations. We have drug labs on there, which we luckily don't have hardly ever anymore and haven't had in years. We could easily add to that list, which is accessible online to anyone pretty much, and get sent out to council members and a whole bunch of other people that have signed out or signed up. Any realtor could probably look it up, or any person could probably look it up online to see historic properties as well. So, or one that you specifically know has an issue that needs to be pointed out, like, you know, it's for sale. We could put stuff like that on it.
Oh, great. Hey, thank you, Suzanne.
Excuse me, Kimberly.
Oh yeah, Joan, hi.
I didn't have my hand raised.
I see that, I'm sorry.
No, I mean both ways on the, you know, the little participants list, but just quickly, when you're talking about realtors and everything, there is the disclosure form, you know, about oil tanks and, you know, flooding and standing water and so forth. Why couldn't it be one item?
That sounds like I'm gonna add it. Disclosure.
That's actually a great idea. And just so you know, not everyone, this is Suzanne again, not everyone does contact the city for liens. So I just had a guy yesterday that bought his property a year and a half ago and paid cash and did not know he had $10,000 worth of liens that were accruing interest. So that's not the best way until I can get those to start being recorded with the county. That's probably not the best flag. This other flag that Joan mentioned is probably better.
See, that's probably what happened with that other person then that contacted me. So yeah, that's good.
And even if they use a realtor, we're in a new age.
Oh, no. Yeah. All right, great. So this is an evolving list. So even if there's stuff that we don't think of today, we can add to it. But I'm going to move on now to the second goal, which is the proactive monitoring of historic properties. So I think we started this discussion last time, and it is a challenge right now for city staff to actively monitor. We just don't have capacity or the time. And so I think that several of the questions in the survey, for those of you that responded, that I appreciate the willingness to offer your time to do that. I just want to talk briefly in the Cessna neighborhood, and it wasn't part of any kind of enforcement. It was part of the Heritage Neighborhood Program. We did a survey of that whole neighborhood using volunteers from the neighborhood association. And so our IT department, Alan, he put together that the base map and set it up so you can download an app on your phone and essentially just go and take pictures. So it worked really well. technology wise, we were able to get pictures. And so that's the kind of system that we're talking about. But I will say that it did involve a commitment by the neighborhood association members. We had we had 4 volunteers, and I happened to have quite a few student interns as well at the time. So that helped a lot as well. So, I mean, it does take legwork, and they just divided up the neighborhood into sections. So in terms of just taking the pictures, that's all that we needed to do in terms of having the neighborhood association help. And so that's something we can consider and think about as we're moving forward, but it's not something that city staff can do. We can't do it on our own. There's also, I think, Juliana, you had a good idea. Help me remember, I think it was using Google Street View, which sometimes the challenge with that is that any screen captures we would take, the images are not our own, we don't own them. And so as our IT department explained to us, we couldn't create a database, which at least for the perspective of if we did have an enforcement case and we wanted to really have a really strong catalog of what the property looked like over time, it's much better to have images that we own. So
exactly. Yeah. Google is very, very careful about that. And that's why for maps, when I include a map in something, I use OpenStreetMaps, where it is an open source project and it's not copyrighted by Google. So, you know, just as a street view, it can be useful as a baseline, but what you did with the neighbors to do the scan survey was probably a much better way to go. And I don't know what kind of resources we'd have to, what kind of volunteer resources we'd have to come up with to do that for all of the properties. But it would be worth finding what we need to do, because we've got, I mean, we may have some resources through the community college and some of the classes there to help with it.
Yeah, definitely. Kendra?
Yes, just a comment to add on that. I'm not sure if you're aware, but Willamette University has an annual Global Day of Service that they do every spring. And so if there was a way to organize what needed to be done to take all these pictures and have, you know, tech savvy, app savvy, GIS savvy individuals do the work, it could be that you could have the project done in a day with a group of Willamette students.
Great idea.
In a day, that's amazing.
Yeah.
When is that?
It's typically in the events kind of span. I don't know what the day is in particular, but it's from mid-March into April.
It's Martin Luther King. It's the Friday of Martin Luther King Day, and I actually know the director of that program.
Great, Zach. Sweet. I love it.
That would be fabulous.
And if this is something we figure out how to do it, then that annual monitoring picture, we could do that same day. That would be brilliant. Love it. Good idea. Thank you.
That would also give time to set it up from a software.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the nice thing is, at least from our IT's perspective, they already did it won't be the first time they did it for Cessna. So it would just be not reinventing the wheel. They'd just be, but it'd give us time to like test it out and make sure we have it down. That's awesome. Great. Okay, so unless anyone has anything else to add on this one, I'm going to move on to goal 3. So this is the consequences one. So double permit fees and other fines, that was already passed by council, so that's already in effect. The I didn't change the policies relating to that 30 days. I do want to, since we have Suzanne and Megan here, I did want to ask your input because this does affect you, whether that 30 days is useful to you, whether it's long enough, do you have any feelings on that before we turn it over to you guys?
So I would say that's enough time. Typically, our enforcement order process is 30 days.
Okay.
Appealing. And then we also, if you were wanting to do not an enforcement order, we can do correction notices, which we typically allow 10 days to correct.
Okay.
So that seems like that would be just a fine timeline to me.
And correction, adding to her point, doesn't necessarily always mean that the entire violation has been repaired or eradicated or whatever word you want to use. It could just mean getting the proper permits, making contact with the proper people.
Okay.
Following through with moving forward. So especially on a correction notice.
So could you help us understand? So what happens once we turn it over to you guys? And I guess maybe is it what's normal? Do you normally start with a correction notice and then go to an enforcement order? And then at what point do you start charging hefty fines?
Megan, you want to call that?
Yeah, so typically if like we get a case and we know that there's a violation, we try to get voluntary compliance. We try at least 2 times. So that's kind of our base. So we might try giving them a verbal warning. And then if that doesn't work, we'll send a correction notice. That's kind of like a friendly reminder, like, hey, do this or else. And then that's in writing, obviously. We have like door knockers that we use. Sometimes we leave a note. So those are all attempts to gain the voluntary compliance. And then if that's not successful, we can issue an enforcement order to the property owner. And then that gives them that time. If they don't do it, then we issue civil penalties at that point. But we kind of have an option at the correction notice, but we don't typically do this in property owner situations where we can cite the person. We use that more in like tenant violation type things. If it's an actual property owner, we typically do enforcement order and then the civil penalties.
Great, that's helpful. What what sort of challenges do you have with the not owner occupied properties? That, like, for example, I know that in the Court Chemeketa district, we've had at least several residences that I can think of that were bank owned, and we just could never get a hold of a person. Like I think this was a few years ago, I was trying to get a hold of a person to work on that voluntary compliance and I couldn't find a human being. Does that happen when you're trying to do it as well? And then what do you do?
Well, we would contact the tenant there at the property. And we typically, if it's a tenant caused violation, then we try to address it with the tenant before getting the property owner involved.
Okay.
And sometimes you can use that as leverage, like, hey, like you need to get this cleaned up, or I'm going to have to tell the owner that this is happening. But in this case, if it's like working on the property, it sounds like it wouldn't necessarily be the tenant doing it. It might be the owner. So then we would just go to the owner about it. Just kind of depends on the situation, I guess.
Right. Yeah. I think
That
this
property,
sorry.
What-
No, I was thinking of a person that, so a house that was vacant and it wasn't owner occupied and people had broken. And
yeah.
Yeah.
So if it's bank owned, we have contacts with a lot of the banks. It's not always easy, but there's generally, if it's bank owned and it's not stuck in the limbo land process of somebody passed away and nobody really quite owns it yet. The banks have companies that are supposed to be maintaining and taking care of these properties. And if they are not, that's when we get involved with the bank. We can actually issue penalties to a bank, a mortgage company. We can even walk into the branch and issue a citation to the branch manager in charge of the local bank. We try not to have to do that. But it's sometimes very hard to actually find out who is the person in charge of what we call zombie property, where it's in
You have a name for
limbo. It's big. Well, and they're Walking Dead, right? They're
yeah.
owned by the bank. The person walked away. Sometimes the person that walked away from the property thought they lost it through a foreclosure, but they didn't actually lose it. They haven't actually been changed in Marion County to say that the bank owns it. So it's a big, hairy mess.
Yeah.
Luckily, we're used to working through that mess, so we can really help you with that. And we have some people here that do it all the time, and they're great at finding who the person is that's responsible.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time to walk us through that. I appreciate that.
Zombie property is not my, by the way. So you
No.
can use it. Yeah.
No. All right, great. So the last issue then is the question, and I'm really interested in what everyone here thinks about this, is if the owner so I've added this, and this is based on the feedback from the survey that not everyone was able to complete. So if the owner has intentionally violated the historic code, then they're not eligible for local financial incentives like the Toolbox grant. So I just wanted to see how everyone felt about that one. I think that it is useful for staff if it's always really great to be able to say to someone who has a historic property that, you know, we do have financial help for them. But it is a sticky wicket when we've got an enforcement case, especially if we've got someone who's very clearly not wanting to comply. So I just, if you guys have some insight or input into this, I'd really love to hear what you think in general.
I would support that, because I feel if someone is intentionally doing something that does not follow the city's standards and guidelines and the Secretary of Interior standards or whatever, that they should not receive a financial benefit from the city. You know, that's, and the Toolbox grants admittedly are not huge amounts of money, but $1,000 is $1,000. And if you pull out original windows and stick in some vinyl windows without review and without approval, and then you want to get a grant to offset that, or you plan to do that kind of work, which does not meet the standards, then I don't see why you should be able to get grant funds for that.
Does anyone else have an opinion about that? Like where I'm thinking there's a gray area is if someone's on it, like they made some alterations, they didn't get historic design review, and they've got a case, but it's because they weren't aware, or they inadvertently, they did it because they didn't know. And I guess I'm curious.
I think my only question about this would be the intent of the code and the regulations around historic property. So in my read of the code, it sounds like the reason for the code is to preserve that historic, those historic features.
Right.
And so if you have someone, I agree with Juliana's statement, but at the same time, I wonder if the purpose is to preserve the property or the feature, then if someone intentionally violated the code, then what is the mechanism to have them undo that? And so I guess I just think about compliance, and are there ways to engage homeowners to undo and then do the right thing, because the purpose is the historic property or feature itself. So it's more about the property than it is about the person. So I guess for me, prohibiting a person from accessing incentives to maintain the historic feature seems like maybe that is, we end up with two lines of compliance, those who do and those who don't. But the ultimate consequence might be that the historic districts or the properties are degraded because people who are intentionally violating are not going to re-engage with the process. So that's the only, and so on this question, I voted against. I mean, I think that people who intentionally violate should have the opportunity under certain circumstances to get grants to restore their property back to its feature.
Thank you, Kendra. I think who's Joan and then Suzanne.
Well, I think.
Oh, you're breaking up. Oh no.
Joan?
We can't hear you. Why can't we hear her? Maybe turn off your camera, Joan, so we can hear you. You might have a low bandwidth.
Oh, I don't know what to do about that.
Are you able to turn your video off? And then we could probably hear you better. And
Okay.
then, perfect, we can hear you. Yes, we can hear you.
But what I said was, if you add into this, if the owner has intentionally violated the historic code and refuses to comply, then they should not get any financial incentives. But, yes, I mean, of course, if they said, if you say, okay, well, I'll change and I decided that I want to, do it the way it should be done.
Great. That's helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So in effect, if the violation was from a previous owner or from the current owner, and they want to correct the violation or the alteration which did not meet the guidelines, and they want to do it properly, then they would be eligible for the grant funds. But my point was that grant funds should not ever go to violate the guidelines.
Right.
If you're going to do it wrong, you shouldn't get grant funds.
Suzanne, did you have?
Am I muted there?
There you are.
Okay. I have just a quick caution. I definitely don't want to interfere with your guys' ideas or anything, but I have a quick caution where it's very difficult in a court of law, which is where a civil penalty ends up, is in front of a hearings officer, to prove intent. Unless they talked to Kimberly and Kimberly said, your house is historic, don't touch it. And then they went and touched it. Very difficult to prove. Sorry, I'm a straight speaker.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
It's very difficult to prove that, but it also would be incredibly difficult to follow through with enforcement action if the person, whether intentionally or not, because that's not generally how we hang our hat in compliance. We hang our hat on, does the violation exist? It doesn't have anything to do with the intent behind the violation. Does the violation exist? Did you in fact violate the code? Yes, you did. Can you fix it? Depending on what it is. If it's a tree, they cut down a tree, you can't fix it, right? If they changed windows out and they can put the original windows back in and start the process over again and do it right, then they can correct the violation. But if during that process, the city is giving them money to fix what they did wrong, it's going to be difficult in court for us to say, this guy deserves this fine And we're,
Oh, I see where you're going.
so we're gonna fine him $1,500 here, but we're gonna give him $1,000 here.
Right.
Fix the violation. So I just have caution to think about that whole picture. Even if right now it looks like they're going to make those repairs.
Yeah.
Right this minute, they're telling you, yes, I'm going to make those repairs. All I need is this money and I can fix it and I'll no longer be in violation. And they get that money and they don't do it right. That
Right.
civil penalty, that enforcement order will then be graduated to a civil penalty and we will have just given money to make it worse. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's horrible.
Yeah. So
Terrible, Suzanne. We don't
know,
want
it's-
that.
I just caution you on if things change. We have people all day. I know nobody would ever lie to us, but we have people all day long telling us that we're going to fix it. I swear to you, tomorrow I'm coming in and getting that permit.
And they also probably say they didn't know and it's not their fault.
It's definitely not their fault ever.
Oh, no.
So can
So-
can I ask a question?
Sure, Kendra.
So around that, though, let's say you had, so it sounds like the violations are on a case-by-case basis. So let's say a person, who knows, they violate, they have a fine, but in the future, they decide for some reason that they've seen the light and they're going to comply with a different aspect of their home. So I guess I'm just wondering about eligibility for future funds if you have a past offense. So is it attached to the person or would this conflict be attached to the person or would it be attached to the case?
I would say you guys get to decide that, but I would say if there's a violation and that violation has been corrected and or mitigated through the civil penalty process or any other process that we end up going to, that it's over. And then they come in and now they want to change their front porch. And then they need funds because they're going to actually put the house more in compliance with your historic code, then of course, reconsider. You guys can choose that though. I mean, there's things we have where, one time you've done it wrong, we do hold it against you for future stuff, but you don't have to do that. That's up to this committee. You guys can decide that. I'm just cautioning you on in conjunction with a violation that's currently open, the case is open, and giving them funds at the same time. That is going to be a conflict that's going to be really hard to deal with.
Kimberly?
Yeah.
Kimberly?
Michael, is that Michael?
Yeah, I think if that was Suzanne, I think the points she's making are very good ones. And I would recommend or propose that the Toolbox grant process be completely separate from the civil enforcement for violations. There's a separate process for applying for those grants, and each of those applications are considered on its own merits. And I think it just compounds the problem to try to put, I know it looks on the surface like it makes sense for the reasons people said earlier, but I just think it's a very complicated addition to that thought. And that while it might not seem fair, the process part of it is important. And you all have raised some important issues. For example, what is an intentional violation? And when does it stop being an effort to enforce and a penalty for the fact that you couldn't enforce it? It just seems to me to make a lot of sense just to keep those processes separate.
Yeah, I think I disagree just slightly. I agree with you, but I disagree on one point, and that is as someone who administers and grants for a living, I think one thing that's not hard to add into a process like this is an eligibility requirement. So, for example, if someone has an open violation, then they are not eligible to apply. So I think there are simple ways to do that that wouldn't necessarily slow that process, but maybe it's just a matter of making sure that we do our due diligence around who's eligible.
No, and Kendra, I think that's a good qualification. And what I was saying wasn't intended to exclude that, but I just think that ought to be incorporated in the toolbox process and not directly or indirectly with the civil penalty.
Right. Right. And the toolbox process is usually it's twice a year. So that gives someone 6 months to clear their violation and then they can apply.
So Zach, I know you're there and taking notes, but as the person who processes the toolbox grants, so if we had a checkbox, right, in the application, which we don't have now, where we just simply ask the applicant, do you have an active historic enforcement violation? Suzanne, is that the right word? We want to ask them whether they have an active case. Like we would probably internally check as well, but I
would prefer to just check it internally and not even
as opposed to ask them, but we would then check. And that's something we can easily do, right, Suzanne?
You should be able to do it even on Amanda.
Yeah, okay.
Frequently, I get once a week or twice a week, I get something that says, is there any open violations on this case? So yeah.
Open violations. Okay, I like that.
I look up in Amanda, just a tip too. Sometimes, even if it's like a multifamily too, that can be under different numbers. So I always look up at tax lot number. That might help you to make sure you find something.
And then what we can do on either end of the education piece, it actually makes it. So I appreciate this insight, Suzanne. I think that I don't deal with a lot of as many, how do I say this nicely? I don't deal with as many crazy people as you do. So I tend to not think that way, and it's helpful that way because I think that this could have gotten us into a lot of trouble. So thank you.
Oh, we're here to point out worst case scenarios. Sorry, that's our job.
Yeah, no, that's why I'm glad you're part of this. So so I don't know if you guys have been tracking. I rewrote letter C while we were talking. So take a look at that. I changed it to read. I took out the word intention. If an owner has an active open and historic enforcement violation, they are not eligible for local financial incentives like the Toolbox grant. So I'm not sure if we need D, but I added it anyway, just because of that. I thought that discussion that Kendra pointed out was a good one, that going to the intention of our program, which is we really want to support the restoration of if there have been violations. We want to support that because that's our overall goal with the.
I have a question also. Does this include building without a building permit?
So that's, I guess, a question for Suzanne's crew. I think that help me understand how enforcement works in building and safety. Do they have their own process?
They do. The building inspector, the senior building inspector, I'm not really sure about the others, but they do send their own correction notices. But as far as sending enforcement orders or issuing penalties and doing that side, we do it for them.
Okay.
So a lot of times work without permit can be included in the violation of what's going on with the historic. It's just a separate code that we can add.
Well, I would just make sure that's covered, because that happens on occasion where someone's doing work without a permit that might not be reflected on the street facing facade of a house, and people might not notice it, but it's still a violation.
Yeah, and our senior building inspector, Ken Eatwell, he does occasionally do stop work orders if he gets a case or a complaint that there is work being done at a property without permit. He's typically the one that goes out and posts the stop work order and then issues a correction notice.
Okay.
So I just added a little bit about work without a permit, so we'll make sure to include that. All right, it's about 5 minutes to 1. Does anyone else have anything else they want to discuss or add about these goals right now before I just try to wrap stuff up? Any other things we missed?
Yeah, I just had a follow-up to what Juliana was just asking about. And I guess I need, probably Suzanne knows, or Susan. People, if they're doing their own work on a house, don't require a permit. Is that correct still?
No.
Depends on the work that they're doing. If they're, some work will still require a permit anyway. Even whether they're a contractor or not, they do require permits for many, many things that have to be done, like siding. If you're replacing an entire roof, electrical work, plumbing, you can't even change your own hot water heater without a permit. So whether they're doing the work themselves or not, they still need to have a permit.
Okay.
I know the surprising one is the water heater, because we've all done that. Yes.
Because we don't want it to blow up and become a rocket, right? Like, is that what?
Yeah, exactly. I've told her that story before. And by the way, it is Suzanne. You were right. Thank you.
Joan, did you have your hand up? I'm sorry, I didn't see it till just now. Is that left over? Oh, okay, great. All right. All right, so I will wrap things up. All right, so next time, it'll be October already, and Zach and I will work on finalizing these policies and strategies. So you're gonna see an email probably, I don't know when we'll get to it, later this week or early next week with our notes from the meeting. And so let us know if there's any corrections, as well as a draft of our initial recommended policies and strategies. So be thinking about if there's anything we've missed or anything you want us to add. I do not think we're going to send out another survey, but if you haven't had a chance to complete that survey yet, please do. And we will update the results from that as well. And if we get any additional input, we'll add that to the updated recommended policies and strategies. And then our goal, hopefully in October, is we'll finalize that, and maybe we'll be done early. Hilarious. But we have December, which I just realized, no, December, we will talk about that in October. So I really appreciate genuinely all of your time and your insight and your input. And if there's any specific issues or problems that we haven't brought up or haven't thought about, especially for those of you that are new, please feel free to include those as well in that survey, or just shoot us an email. And Juliana, is there anything else you want to add as we wrap up?
I think we have completed the agenda, and
yes.
We'll adjourn the meeting to October 26th. And if you haven't returned your the survey, please do, and expect to hear from staff by email.
Yes, yeah, and Zach will include the YouTube link too. So if there's anyone you want to share our wonderful insights with, please share the video. All right.
Okay.